Make your next getaway a place where you feel like you belong. With so much to enjoy and experience all year long, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. 60 miles of beaches, over 2,000 restaurants, 90 golf courses, 50 mini golf courses. Music fans can kick back and listen to live music every day and night at oceanfront music venues. Plus, everyone can enjoy the state parks, gardens, amusement parks, shopping, and endless ocean views. Get away to where you belong. The beach. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
For exclusive podcasts and more, sign up at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, patients told police their doctor sexually assaulted them, but the hospital's lawyers fought back against survivors and the DA. We'll review the Wondery podcast, Exposed, Cover-Up at Columbia University. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of The Final Curtain, Laura Bricker. Hey, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, our captain of all things cynical, the author of the City trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
Hey, Rebecca.
So, Toby, I did get confirmation that Gilbert King was present for the entire taping of your last deep dive. That's what another person told me. Yes, that's what Elon Green told me.
He was undercover. I didn't see his little thing pop up.
I don't know. Well, we'll have to maybe get double confirmation, but that's what I've heard.
That's fine.
That's what I've heard.
It's like how you can be like hidden on the dating apps, Toby. You can go in and you can watch and you can observe from afar.
Got it.
Now, I got an email right before it says Gilbert has registered for this event.
Yes.
I'm like, well, I wonder who that could possibly be.
Yep.
Well, it shows my powers of observation are maybe a little lacking.
It was a good thing you didn't do that.
It was Gilbert Gottfried, Kevin.
Oh, okay.
So he put out a nice little tweet about it now that it's out. So that was nice.
Yeah.
It was a great book.
I'm so glad to hear that. I have yet to read it. I am very busy listening to my book club book. So as soon as I finish that, I plan on checking that book out. So, Kevin, this is obviously Monday's podcast.
It is.
What is coming up on Thursday's show?
Well, on Thursday, you're going to hear our review of Only Murders in the Building, Season 3. Just a reminder that tomorrow, we'll talk about this in the business section, but that tomorrow we've got our live Crowdcast broadcast where you're going to hear us go over the season finale because the season finale drops tomorrow on Hulu, so we're going to get it out. And hopefully maybe the podcast will come out before Thursday, so while it's still hot.
All right. So we're not going to be talking about the Jason and Travis Kelce podcast. We're going to be talking about Only Murders in the Building.
Fuck no. Thank you. Not the least bit interested.
Because I'll tell you, this as of today, this taping was the day that the new episode dropped in which they discussed Taylor Swift showing up at that Chiefs game. And I woke up this morning, that episode dropped. I flew out of bed, put my AirPods in immediately to listen to that episode because I wanted to hear all the stuff. And I'm thrilled to see that their podcast is now the #1 podcast in America. It's very exciting. Anyway, I listened to it for the first time today, although I had seen snippets of it before on, Twitter and stuff because they do it on YouTube primarily and they put it out as audio. And it's fine. I mean, it's just a sports podcast. They talk about they each talk about their own respective games. And then they chat and then they answer questions from fans. And what was funny about the episode that came out today was that they, in a very wonderful way, spent 25 minutes talking about Jason's Eagles game before they addressed any of the content that all of America wanted to hear about.
Hey, good for them.
Yeah, I really appreciated their patience with us.
I'm sure all the listeners did too.
All of the new listeners that tuned in.
Get to the Tay-Tay.
Anyway, Jason is the funny one, though. I will say he is the funny one, and he's got the better eyebrows. So anyway, New Heights by Jason and Travis Kelce. We will not be reviewing it on this show, but I will continue to listen to that podcast just to see what I can glean about both their respective teams. Patrick Mahomes, of course, who I love, and whatever the hell is going on with Travis and Taylor Swift. All right, so Kevin, we should probably talk about what we're talking about.
Dying to do that
on this podcast. So should we get to it?
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and drop that first clip right now. It's a serious one. Leading off.
I had this cool sensation on my area, and I was like, that didn't feel like an examination. Here I am, 38 years old. I know what it feels like.
After a patient reported that Dr. Robert Haddon assaulted her in the exam room, many women came forward with similar accusations. But aggressive tactics by lawyers for the OBGYN stymied the prosecution, ultimately resulting in a slap on the wrist.
And she goes, the thing is, he's not going to have any jail time, but he is going to lose his medical license around the world. And that's what you wanted to happen, am I right?
Survivors learned behind the hardball maneuvers was Haddon's employer. For years, Columbia University ignored the complaints against the doctor, choosing to protect its brand instead of its patients.
Finding that letter was a moment of pure relief, but it was also a gut punch knowing what Diane knew now, that Haddon had continued to abuse women for 20 more years, that she had told them so clearly, and no one had listened.
In the Wondery podcast, Exposed, cover-up at Columbia University, Dr. Death host Laura Beil talks to survivors, advocates, and prosecutors about the decades-long effort to hold a serial sexual predator accountable. The series also explores how elite institutions wield their influence to avoid responsibility. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Exposed, cover-up at Columbia University. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Laura, we just listened to the retrievals from the team at Serial. This does follow similar themes, does it not?
Yeah, actually, when I was first listening to this, I was thinking, wait, didn't we just listen to this? Because it felt so eerily similar to me in terms of, you know, we have women going into an Ivy League medical institution with a doctor that they believe is well regarded, and then something going awry. In the retrievals, it was the extreme pain that these women were going through as they were having their eggs collected for IVF. In this case, it's, I'm just going to put it out there because I did in the podcast, their vaginas are getting licked.
And other things.
And other things. And it's, again, in a setting where you think something like this shouldn't and wouldn't be happening. And because of that, with some of these women, there's a reluctance to report it. But there's also that same sort of, we're going to circle the wagons mentality where, you know, the people at Columbia that know what's happening are basically going to keep this in-house, not acknowledge it, and not do anything about it. And it felt very, very parallel to the type of response that we heard with Yale at the Yale Fertility Clinic in the retrievals. And it's that same, like, we are a bunch of, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but we're a bunch of old white guys in an old white guy institution, and we are not going to let anything affect us. And so we are just going to sort of dismiss this and move along. Yeah. And it was like just eerily similar, the response, even though one was a fertility clinic and one was an OBGYN, and equally maddening in both.
Yeah. So, Kevin, we need to talk about the opening scene of this podcast because we have a woman describing her assault, and it's pretty graphic, but she did, quote, all of the right things. And you don't want to say there's a wrong thing in this instance, but in terms of what you can do after the assault, she did those things, right?
Yeah.
Which to me, it was surprising to me because I'm not 100% sure I would react the way she reacted. I probably would be too stunned, too surprised, maybe doubting myself What did you think about the whole opening of this podcast?
Well, I did think the opening scene was pretty powerful, and you're right, disturbing and gross all at the same time.
If you can imagine, like your knees are up, it formed a bridge, like a wall. And all of a sudden, his head dipped down. And he licked my vagina. And I jumped up, and his face turned beet red.
It is kind of tough to think that really the only reason this whole case started to unravel was that in this particular assault, the patient instantly knew what was wrong and reported it to her partner, who instantly and reflexively called the police, and the police responded. That means that, as you say, in many other cases, and we hear this, other patients were like, I wasn't sure. I'm like, well, what is this? This must be, my first time having a baby. And so maybe this is actually part of the procedure. And then for many of those who understood immediately, they also were like shocked or embarrassed or frozen. Yeah. Like after they left and they didn't think to report it. I mean, we also hear from women throughout. They said, like, I knew it happened to me and I buried it for years and years and years. So it's even great. Like the cops instantly, like they talked about it amongst themselves. The patrolmen are like, let's go get this motherfucker. The woman, her partner, the cops, they all realize exactly the extent of what's going on. They want to react, but that doesn't always translate into justice down the road.
Yeah. Chubby, when I was listening to the first episode of this podcast, I just kept thinking, okay, so we're 9 minutes in. This whole thing's wrapping up, right? Because it all just sort of like was cascading quickly, but also the podcast.
So it's another 9-minute episode of the
of this season of this podcast, yes. But I also felt like the story was cascading very quickly, and it was being told very quickly. And I saw that you had a note along the same lines.
Yeah, well, I guess there's a couple of things. One is it felt to me like at the beginning, and I don't know if I just got used to it or they stopped doing it, but it felt like everything was kind of edited a little bit close. Like when they were doing the edits of the narrator's voice, like they weren't given enough space to breathe. So everything sounded super rushed to me, at least. But yeah, I mean, this is like one of the themes of our, 9 years of doing this is that whenever there's somebody who's involved in an institution, and we went through this with the Boy Scouts, I think last week, the institution closes ranks and tries to protect itself. So like when that started, and then you see that this is like the first quarter of the first episode of a season, it's like, okay, well, there's obviously going to be some institutional pushback. This is not going to be a straightforward case for them just to kind of make the case, and the guy goes to jail and everything's good. So yeah, I guess I had sort of assumed that was what was going to happen. And that is what happens, although in ways that I guess are kind of predictable, but it's always disappointing when a place like Columbia, which you sort of would hope as an academic institution would be upholding like certain values because, you're sending your kids there and it's a major institution in our country, that they wouldn't be resorting to what appears to be sort of the lowest, least attractive ways of dealing with this kind of sexual assault. And that ends up being the case later.
So, Laura, I took note at the beginning that this was co-reported with ProPublica. And I noted that you did a little bit of side looky-looing at the ProPublica side of this investigation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I did. I always like to see if there's like a companion media to podcasts. A lot of podcasts have something usually on the website affiliated with the podcast that has like maps or pictures of people. Because I like to see the pictures of the people involved. And in this case, there's this ProPublica report, and it was very effective the way they had pictures of a sampling, a pretty good sampling. I'm going to say about 10 of the women that were victims in this case, with just like 2 sentences about how it affected them. But they had them all lined up. So you'd be reading the article and then you'd get to this section where there's like 6 pictures lined up of women, and you can't actually advance the article to read more until you scroll through all of the women and read each of their accounts. And that to me was a really good use of visual media to complement the podcast and to complement the reporting that was done in the podcast. And, I think one of the things that I took from that, obviously it had the conclusion. I've only listened through episode 4. I don't think it's going to be a spoiler to talk about what happened because it's out there in the media with the case, coming back to be retried in 2020 and, more information about how they basically, failed to hand over evidence. So I don't know, in a way it's like a reverse Brady violation, but they didn't hand over evidence. They had subpoenas that had been served, compelling them to turn over this evidence. They didn't. They did not tell the district attorney when more patients came forward with allegations, which if you're a prosecutor, more victims coming forward is just, I would think, strengthening your case. But Columbia was, like you said, circling the ranks. And, there's this information in there in this reporting about how the DA found this so egregious that they did an investigation into the university and the medical center. And I think what's unfortunate there is they are thinking like we are protecting ourselves by not turning this information over. But actually that had the opposite effect of what you would think would be a fair resolution in this case by them doing that, if that makes sense. So I highly recommend going to that ProPublica site because there's a lot of information there in a way that is visual. And if you're a visual learner, easier to digest in a way.
So Kevin is talking about what Laura is talking about. I mean, we'll go back and talk about what happened before this in a second, but there is a sort of for lack of a better word, a hoarder involved in sort of unlocking this whole thing.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
This woman out in Provo, Utah.
Who thought a hoarder would solve a case?
Yeah, this woman out in Provo, Utah, who has this letter that she wrote to Columbia in the 90s exposing this guy, and Columbia wrote her back.
Yeah, this is really fascinating because I don't know. I like the things that I wrote, but I don't find it so precious that I need to keep everything. And if you got a couple of boxes, I kept envisioning trying to find one letter in all those Mar-a-Lago bathroom boxes. Was it the lawyer who asked did you get an 18-wheeler to move all this stuff from Manhattan? It's amazing though. I mean, but that is a very important piece of evidence because obviously it shows that somebody was made aware of it. Now, I think you got to fault Columbia for at least 2 times because they failed to act beyond this letter in the 90s. And then you have all this other stuff when it comes to light again.
Which means there are probably other times.
Yeah. It's like a serial killer doesn't stop killing for 20 years, right? And if you're a serial sexual predator and all day long you're there with women in intimate situations, then, and they do believe there were hundreds of victims, even though maybe not that many came forward and not that many were represented at trial. But I do have one question, though, about the nurse from the very first incident that we heard.
And the one with the letter describes the same kind of situation with the nurse being in the room.
Being in the room, but turning away.
Yep.
And not looking. So either you read that as the doctor was really bold and just taking advantage of she's looking the other way, now I'm going to do this. Or it's that this nurse or the staff in general knew shit like this was happening.
No, he's a creep, yeah.
And they didn't want to be witnesses to it. Very specifically, they wanted to see no evil so they could speak no evil.
Yep.
And I find that very sad because if this has been going on for years and years and years and years, there's got to be a time when a staff member walked in or got a sense. It's impossible this was a surprise to his colleagues.
No, it was impossible. And I'll tell you, it speaks to the power dynamic at play here, right?
It was impossible, you think, or was not?
I think it's impossible that nurses and other staffers didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
And it speaks to the power dynamic. I would be shocked to learn that staffers or nurses hadn't complained and reported him and that nothing happened.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah, well, this is called Cover Up at Columbia University. We've only heard the first 4 episodes. So as Laura says, I assume that we are going to hear more about the cover-up angle in the final 2 episodes.
Yeah. I bet we are too.
Yeah, I want to echo what you're saying, Rebecca. There's definitely a hierarchy here in the hospital. And unfortunately, you've got nurses and we hear incidents where the nurse is staring at the woman don't come back, go away, we know what's happening. But I can see it being even if I do report it, who's going to take me seriously? I'm a nurse and he's a doctor.
Right.
And I really feel like that was a big part of this story.
Yeah, well, sometimes there are graders among equals. Like the four of us, like we're all equal, but I'm forcing you to stop and listen to me talk about the business section right now.
Oh, that was smooth, Kevin.
Yeah, that's power. That's a power dynamic right there.
That really, it is.
Yeah, Toby just folded his arms.
I'm turning my back.
It's just like I'm working on the body language right now.
Yes, my God.
Toby's like, I don't have to watch this.
Yeah, I'm looking at Laura like, go away. Don't come back.
First off, I want to thank everybody. Tomorrow, I should say Wednesday of this week is my walk for Walk a Mile in Their Shoes. This is the fundraiser where I put on a pair of high heel shoes. And I walk a mile down Main Street in Concord to raise money for the Crisis Center of Central New Hampshire. Thank you so much to all of the listeners who have been donating and getting me closer and closer to my goal. Last year, I was the number one fundraiser, and so far this year, I have the most donors of anybody in this event. As far as dollar value.
Yes. You're not going to be number one.
No, because our good friend, a philanthropist, decided that he was... It's great. You know, somebody with rich friends gets in, but like when they're making like $6,000 donations and stuff like that, it's like, well, I'm not catching up.
No. But you have many, many donations.
Many, many donations.
Which I actually think that's better.
I think it's better.
Strength in numbers.
Strength in numbers.
Yes.
Okay, Bernie Sanders.
Hey now.
So if you've got $5 or more to throw around and you don't want to, give it to my fundraiser, you can give it to us at Patreon. It's patreon.com/partners in crime media. You get the Crime Writers on After Show. This week, we're giving our autumn recommendations.
Oh.
Does that sound better than fall recommendations?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. It sounds fancier, right?
It sounds more seasonal.
It's our cozy Hygge season recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. So we're each going to give 2 recommendations to everybody. Either something on TV, movies, books, podcasts, something that we're probably not covering on the show, but things that we want people to try to enjoy.
Great.
Becca loves those kinds of episodes. We also have, and almost forgot this, tomorrow, being Tuesday, we are, as I said, we're going to be doing our live crowdcast of Only Murders in the Building. The 4 of us are going to be here. We're going to have live people coming in and watching us record our reviews. It's going to be good. We're going to have a little extra, some visuals and some other things going on. It's going to be a whole production. And then we'll have a quick turnaround on that podcast because everybody wants to talk about which of the Pickwick triplets did it.
Pickwick triplets. It's quite the earworm.
It is.
I can't say the words, but that's...
What was last season's earworm? Was it Angel and Flip Flops?
I don't know.
What was the Brazos?
All I know is that it's like a baby committed a murder in this fake musical. A baby is a suspect.
But which baby? Other things to get, Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. Toby just did a review of Beneath the Ruthless Sun, and I was going to ask all about what it's like to have Gilbert King eavesdrop, but I guess we already covered that. Rebecca?
Yes, we did.
Looking at my notes. You can get Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker, and you can get Married with Podcasts, in which Rebecca and I give out advice, including one listener wants to know, when is it time to get a divorce?
Yeah.
And the answer is,
when you
probably
ask that question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, is that it for the business section?
Yeah, thus ends the business section.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and fade that music out right now. So, Kevin, I know you want to talk right now, but first, I need to talk a little bit about Squarespace, because Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You know that we make all of our websites with Squarespace. We made Crime Writers On with Squarespace. That old podcast I had, HGTV and Me, was made with Squarespace. And of course, we make the Law and Order podcast. We make These Are Their Stories with Squarespace. Plus, I make all of my day job podcasts with Squarespace because Squarespace is incredible. You can use blogs, videos, social media, podcasts, and now there are member areas where you can lock a new revenue stream for your business and free time up in your schedule by selling access to gated content like videos, online courses, or newsletters like, maybe you like that blank stack thing. Push that to the side and use Squarespace. So this summer, why not share your adventures with your followers, maybe in a newsletter, or make some fun video compilations of your summer fun? You can create pro-level videos, effortlessly with Squarespace Video Studios app. Or share blogs, videos to social media, push website content to your favorite channels so that your followers can share it too. Use the insights to grow your business. Just analyze which channels are most effective and, use that to make the magic keep happening. Anyway, get it all done. Just go to squarespace.com/crime for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code CRIME to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Again, that's CRIME to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5 GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
All right, so Toby, we have to talk about this twist that happens in episode 3, which I think maybe people who followed this story closely might have known, but I did not. And that's when we find out that one of the women that we've heard about in this story, Evelyn, is actually Evelyn Yang, wife of presidential candidate Andrew Yang. I really enjoyed the way this twist was unveiled. What did you think about that twist in the particular story and the way that it's revealed to us? And then Evelyn's, the way she sort of handles it and her choice to sort of go to the media.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a crazy twist that one of the victims ends up being the wife of a presidential candidate. For me, what I thought was really interesting was how she was reluctant until she went sort of on the road to do campaigning for her husband, and seems to have, in the course of that, really kind of taken upon sort of this public servant approach, and that what she was doing was not so much for herself, but for other people, like the people who she'd met while she was out, mixing with people for her husband.
It's you may not always have a platform. And if you have this important story to share, then it's important that you do it while you can.
I thought that was really interesting for somebody who I think she talked about how she was sort of a private person to begin with, and then had to kind of adjust.
I think, Toby, it's important for listeners who might not know, because we are very hooked into the presidential race here in New Hampshire. We see it all. Andrew Yang, although he didn't make it far into the primary season, was a phenomenon for a period of time. When I did videos for New Hampshire Public Radio, his was the only YouTube video we made that got tens or hundreds of thousands of views.
Right.
He was a phenomenon for a period of time. And so being anonymous as his wife became impossible at a certain point.
Yeah, he had a sort of, for a presidential candidate, a small but extremely devoted and excited following.
Of bros, mostly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. My son, Will, was quite enthused about Andrew Yang and had a T-shirt and some bumper stickers.
Part of the Yang gang, yes.
And I think it's only surprising in the sense that there's a name that we would recognize. It's not surprising that somebody of affluence would be a victim, because it was women of all sorts of
everybody.
Of every kind.
He didn't have a type. As Evelyn Yang points out. I mean, Toby, didn't you get the sense that this guy probably assaulted and molested every woman who came into his office? I mean, it just seemed very systemic.
Yeah, they point out that there doesn't seem to be a pattern or a type or anything like that. Of the people who came forward, there's no common features in terms of looks, race, socioeconomic status, anything like that.
Stage of pregnancy, he doesn't give a shit.
Right, exactly.
Be in the delivery room.
Yeah, whether it's everybody, I mean, I don't know, but I think you could say that everybody was a potential victim, and that if he's not getting everybody, it's sort of arbitrary who he is and who he isn't, because there don't seem to be any sort of internal criteria for him.
You know who does have a type though, Toby? Isabel Kirchner.
Professional type.
Would you like to talk about her client portfolio a little bit?
So when I was saying before how, you'd hope that an institution of higher learning like Columbia wouldn't sink to the bottom, part of sinking to the bottom is hiring Isabel Kirchner, I think, who, in the podcast is sort of identified as, making her living defending wealthy men who behave badly, particularly towards women. So she represented Harvey Weinstein. She represented Matt Gaetz. And apparently that's who Columbia University wants to be associated with as another client of hers.
There was a very good reason Cantwell called her. Kirshner was a powerful name among New York City defense attorneys, especially for men like Robert Haddon.
I've developed this niche practice of men behaving badly.
So then Isabel Kirchner, like in the actual trial or in the sort of what she's sort of threatening to do, in addition to doing all these sort of lawyer tricks of making it very difficult for the prosecution to go after her client, is also sort of signaling that she's going to drag the women who are making the accusations through the mud. It's sort of these combination of things that the district attorney's office decides in the end to accept a deal in which he gets off fairly lightly, at least in the view of the victims. Everybody else is trying to spin it as pretty good, but the people who matter in this case feel betrayed.
So I'll just say, and I know Laura has it along these lines too, Isabel Kirchner is a good fucking lawyer, and that's why guilty people hire her, okay? Mm-hmm. So I think that getting her perspective in the podcast was great. I think she was a great get for this podcast. What was concerning to me was the cavalier way in which she talked about talking to Cy Vance about this case.
We spoke with Vance. He said he recused himself from any meetings about Robert Haddon's case at the office, and that his friendship with Kirshner did not influence the outcome. Kirshner insisted the same, but did admit to some venting.
It wasn't like I expected him to do anything about it. It was just like, she's a lying bitch, and I'm going to kill her.
But she also talked about, did she preside over Cy Vance's wedding, or did Cy Vance preside over her wedding?
He presided over her wedding.
Hers, yeah.
Right. She ran or worked on his campaign. It was more than just one campaign donation. I mean, she talked about their very close relationship. She talked about the fact that she talked to him about this case, and she knows very, very well how this office works, that they make a decision on cases based on whether or not they think they can win or lose them. And if she is feeding him directly information in casual over drinks conversations where she's like, hey, Cy, how are you? How are your kids? I fucking hate your prosecutor. What a bitch she is. And by the way, you're definitely going to lose this case because she's making mistake after mistake. If she's feeding him that information directly and she has that access to him, that does tip the scales. And I'm not so sure I would be so comfortable just being super chill talking about that in an interview with a journalist. I might just not be like so proud of that. Laura, I don't know what you think, but I know it happens. It's just what fucking happens.
I'm going to say is that legal communities are smaller than you realize because a lot of people start in the same area. They go on to private practice, DA's office, defense practice, whatever they're doing. But there is a lot of camaraderie in those communities of people that do know each other over decades. So, yeah, I think it came across as, like you said, very cavalier in the way that she mentioned it. But I think that happens a lot in the legal world in that people know each other. People have worked together. Now they're on opposite sides. Like I can think of people that I know that I've worked with on the defense side. Now they're on the prosecution side. Now they're in a different, so there is definitely that relationship building that happens over a period of time in a certain area in the legal community where they do all know each other.
Sure.
So, yeah, it seems inappropriate in this
case.
He's
an elected official, though, Laura. He's not just
He is an elected official. No, I'm just saying what I'm saying
is benefiting in this case is the question.
Yeah, and I'll say she's good at her job, and we can listen to this and we can feel just horror and we can be pissed off and we can be fired up that she is catering her practice to these sort of clients. But at the same time, despite the allegations, everybody is entitled to a defense and a vigorous defense. And that guy got a vigorous defense because he had the means to pay for the top attorney. Not everybody has the means to pay for the top attorney.
He didn't either. It was Columbia.
He didn't pay for it.
Yeah.
Columbia did. But Laura, this is the thing, though. It's a small community, obviously. Well, I mean, maybe Manhattan's actually a big community, but okay, there are people in certain circles. She knew exactly what she was doing when she had that conversation.
Oh, no, she knew.
And I don't know who Brian, he shouldn't have had that conversation with her. So
he should not have had that fucking
conversation. Whoever brought that up in the first place should have known better. If he's just saying, what are you working on? It shouldn't be something in front of his office. There should be something about a civil case or something like that. But that never should have come up. And they both knew better.
Yeah.
But she got the thing, and she got what she wanted.
Isn't it weird that she's like talking about it so casually?
He might have thought, oh shit, I stepped into it. But she knew exactly what she was. I'm getting my chance to spin him on this. And so, my rage walk.
I totally agree with you on that, Kevin. I guess what I'm saying is that these sort of conversations, I think, happen more than you realize.
But who do they benefit more? They always benefit. Then they never benefit the people that they should benefit. They always benefit the people with all the advantages.
There's nothing wrong with being friends with colleagues and stuff like that, but particularly in the legal profession where there are, ethical standards and all that stuff. That conversation never should have happened. And it's something that she would just like talk about it because it's almost like she's bragging about it.
She is.
It's almost like she's bragging about it.
She said she wanted to fucking kill the prosecutor.
No, but bragging about like, I went up to Cy Vance and I went,
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that sort of Cy Vance's reputation?
Yes.
I mean, is that he's knows everybody and everybody can kind of try and influence him and that's kind of the way he works.
Yes.
She gave him a $250 donation.
Again, like Isabel Kirchner, I mean, she's obviously good. And for Columbia, like you've got a freaking reputation, right? I mean, is that who you want to have being the face of this, your face of this trial? Like that to me, it's sort of like, look at the company you're keeping, right? Like not her in particular, but her clients, definitely. Like, are you throwing yourself in with freaking Harvey Weinstein in New York City on a sort of Me Too type of case? Like, you got to be kidding me. That's nuts.
Yeah.
I want to just follow up real quick on like you guys like the plea bargain part of this.
Yes.
Yeah. Because when you hear plea bargain, you're all like, oh my God, they took a plea bargain. They didn't take the case to trial. It's pretty common. It's actually required for prosecutors to put out a plea offer to resolve cases before trial. However, in this case, where you had all of these women with very consistent reports of what happened and women that were willing to go the distance to see this case resolved, this is not the type of case that you would typically see resolved in a plea bargain. You see cases resolved in plea bargain where you might have like an underage victim that you don't want to put on the witness stand and re-traumatize. And so you have a plea bargain that, some sort of penalty, maybe not the top penalty, but at least something so that you can spare that person going through. But in this case, where you had what would from the outside appear to be a pretty strong case, this does not appear to be the type of case that you would typically see resolved with a plea bargain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but Laura, it's not the fact that, it was worthy of not giving up, like going to trial. Certainly I could see that, the calculation might be, they keep throwing all this stuff at us and like it would be easier. The problem with that plea bargain is that it was no community service. It was it
was a fucking sweetheart deal.
It was give up your license, mister. You're never going to get a job anyway after this. Right. It's like, it was absolutely amazing that that's what they agreed to.
Yeah, no, I forgot. I guess what I'm saying is that when you look at the context of like, you had these witnesses and these victims lined up ready to go. This is not the typical case where they'd be like, we're not going to trial because like people don't want to testify. I guess that's what I was getting at. And,
no, they made the case that it was going to be difficult because of the attorneys.
Yeah. And in this case, so in some cases you're like, we don't want to put this person on the stand because like, they've got credibility issues. But in this case, you had so many victims willing to go forward, I guess is what I was getting at, Kevin. And then you got this like, and then they have the plea and like, one's a felony and one's a misdemeanor. And so only the people whose charges were picked by him are the people that get to actually have a victim impact statement.
It was never the strength of the case, because the case was super strong. The problem was that, as Toby always says, if you've got money, it's a different justice system for you.
And ironically, the fact that more victims kept coming forward
made it more difficult.
It made it more fucking difficult to prosecute him, which makes me wild.
Want to know how to get the same cell coverage for up to half the cost? Well, instead of spending a fortune building and maintaining their own cell phone towers, Consumer Cellular just pays to use the same towers as the largest carriers and passes the savings on to you. Pretty smart, huh? Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5 GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out Exposed, Cover Up at Columbia University? Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a thumbs up on this podcast. I think that this was very well reported. We had voices of people who were directly impacted by this cover up, victims in this case. We had very solid reporting. We also had input from the defense team in this, which we sometimes don't get because they're often reluctant to talk to the media. But I think it's another podcast in the vein that we've listened to of the retrievals or things we've done with like Cosby, Epstein, Weinstein, rich men who are finally being called to account for their behavior. And I've only listened to episode 4, but so far this extremely well done and definite rage-walking material.
Toby Ball, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Exposed, Cover Up at Columbia University?
Yeah, I'll give this a thumbs up. I echo what Laura was saying about it has the right sources. The story is very interesting. It's got a couple of little twists and turns. It's got some big personalities. I feel like, and this is kind of hard to quantify, it came off as being kind of bland. I kind of felt like it wasn't a very distinct sound or feel to the podcast. I mean, it just sounded like sort of a here are the facts type of thing without having that kind of feel of like, a newspaper podcast that we get sometimes. It's kind of maybe it's not a big criticism, but I think a little bit of time spent on how is this going to sound? How can we make this kind of distinctive would have been helpful. But the reporting's there. I mean, there's not many voices that you would want to have talk about this. I mean, there's a couple, but you weren't going to get them anyway. So they've got great sourcing and the story's good. Yeah, so it's a thumbs up.
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm going thumbs up. We didn't even talk about Laura Beil, who is, from Dr. Death and all these. This is like perfectly up her alley. I can't imagine anybody else reporting this. I feel like if somebody else pitched this, they'd say, yeah, we're going to give this to Laura Beil. It's good. I think both Laura and Toby are correct. I think that it did move a little fast. For me, I felt like this was one where you could kind of open the space up a bit. And I also personally had some problem keeping track of which of the victims we're listening to. That's sort of a deficiency of a non-visual medium. It's hard to just, sometimes judging by their voices, which person was which. In this particular case, I had a problem with that. However, those are quibbles. I thought that this was, really well put together. It brought to light a bunch of issues that have, go beyond this particular case. It has to do with influence. It has to do with the fact that if you have money, if you have a $2 billion or $5 billion endowment, is that what they said? If you have all the money in the world, you can push the legal system to the limit. And not just in civil court. We see this in criminal court, on the news, and it's just delay. And it's a war of attrition, and no one gets their proper comeuppance in a case like that. But I think, when we get to the end of episode 6, we will see that hopefully there's a happy ending here. Okay, so I'm going to go thumbs up for this podcast.
I'm going thumbs up as well. I share some of your minor criticisms, all of you. Toby, I agree with you. This podcast, for lack of a better word, could have more style, both in the writing and the production of it. I mean, I do think it's hard to not compare it to the retrievals. And, the retrievals had extremely strong writing and extremely strong production style with, soundtrack, scoring, space, breathing. And I just think that's has nothing to do with the host and nothing to do with reporting. That's just the production house, and that's just the machine that made it. And I just think that, it's just something to think about when you're making something like this, especially about a story that is so heavy, producing it in a way that makes it not stylized, making it distinctive in some way really helps it be a little bit more memorable. Because there are big swaths of this that weren't memorable to me. And I'll just echo what you said, Kevin. Podcasts really need to do a better job generally of signposting things like names. I know that it seems repetitive and dumb maybe on paper, but there's far too many podcasts that I've listened to, and this is a good example of it, where I'm like, oh, it's a letter in the basement lady. It's the lady who's a dancer. The only person whose name I remember in this is a woman whose name is revealed because she's connected to a famous person, right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds dumb that I should have to maybe take notes.
I think editors become blind to that because they're so close to it, they don't realize.
I do, yeah. and I think that when you're reporting something like this, it's almost like, well, I said it in graph 3, and now I'm graph 10, so like the reader could just go up and see it again. No, that's not how audio works, and it's okay to really drive home to the listener. Here's who you're hearing again, and here's why, and here's how you remember them. And if you listen to the podcast made by like people from Serial, like they're masterful at that. Like the people's names when you finish the story, and there's just that kind of signposting stuff missing from this, and those are sort of my minor complaints about this. But it's generally a thumbs up for me. I think the reporting is really strong. I love the ProPublica part of this. I love that it shows. And I do think that Laura Beil and that partnership was the good one to put together for this story. So yeah, thumbs up for me for this podcast. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. And I think it's a really strong piece of reporting. All right, now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the Crime of the Week. A Miami-Dade man is in trouble with City Hall because of his backyard swing, because that swing is actually a trapeze. Miguel Quintero has erected a circus-sized trapeze rig on his property and has been giving lessons on how to fly through the air with the greatest of ease. But city officials have issued citations against Quintero for things like failing to get building permits or for operating a home business. But the government seems to be neutral on doing a straddle whip or reverse knee hang in a residential area. The former aerial artist is suing the city, saying they violated Florida law against using satellite imagery to spot his trapeze, as if neighbors couldn't see amateurs doing the uprise shoot or the bird's nest 30 feet above the roofline. He's also begun a long shot campaign for mayor. Quintero may be a great teacher, but we have some concerns, especially after learning the platform, wires, and safety net are not permanent structures and can be taken apart in less than an hour and jammed into his truck. So panel, more circus stars should have a side hustle teaching their skills, maybe? So Laura Bricker, what circus act would you like to learn?
Well, first I was going to say one, and then I realized that is no longer an appropriate act to include. The big cat acts are no longer.
Nope. Nope.
No. So we're not going to say that.
No, so Siegfried and Roy, they are not.
No, I am going to go with knife throwing or sword swallowing. And I would like to add this to the repertoire of recent skills I'm acquiring, like lassoing. So pretty much I can be like a ninja now. I can lasso, I can sword throw, I can hide my sword by swallowing it. I mean, I think there's a lot of possibilities there.
What do you think, Toby Ball? What circus act would you like to learn?
None of them. I don't want to do any of those acts.
Kevin Flynn, what about you? What circus act would you like to learn?
I want to get 19 of my friends into that little car.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I need 16 friends for it.
All right. Well, for me, I think it's you know what it's not? I know what it's not.
Sword swallowing.
100%. It is not sword swallowing.
I know.
Yes, you do know. I'm going to leave it there. All right, Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you on social media to ask you follow-up questions about the circus acts you would like to learn, how can they find you there?
They can find me at Laura Bricker. And last week, I lassoed a step stool.
Nice. Toy Ball, folks want to reach out to you and pitch you on maybe being that guy who rides the motorcycle inside that little ball. How could they find you on social media?
At Toby Ball and H.
Kevin Flynn, how can you be found?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
If you want to find me anywhere on social media, including Instagram, where you can see a lot of pictures of my dogs, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show everywhere at Crime Writers On, or apparently you can even stream us on YouTube. And I encourage you to join our incredible community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. We also have a regular Facebook page. Go there, hit join the group. You will not regret it. Our group is rad. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia. You'll also get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this show is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Treehouse Yoga Studio above the Mockingbird Cafe in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement where we also keep boxes and boxes filled with every piece of paper we've ever written on. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
Can you guys tell I'm deep in the defense mindset again?
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
It's good.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Except
I'm in the psychosis. No,
except that woman is a traitor to women everywhere.
Yeah, no.
I bet
But she made her money.
I bet she's got hella money, yeah.
Partners in Crime Media.